All right, everybody. Um, I am back with part two with the GSA bonds. So let's go ahead and get into this. All right, 28.102-1 General. A. The Miller Act, 40 USC 3131 requires performance and payment bonds for any construction contract exceeding $150,000, except that this requirement may be waived, one, by the contracting officer for as much of the work as is to be performed in a foreign country upon finding that it is impracticable for the contractor to finish such bond, or two, as otherwise authorized by the Miller Act or other law. B. 1. Pursuant to 40 U.S.C. 3132 for construction contracts greater than $30,000, but not greater than $150,000. The contracting officer shall select two or more of the following payment protections, given particular consideration to inclusion of an irrevocable letter of credit as one of the selected alternatives. One, a payment bond. Two, a irrevocable letter of credit or IOC. Three, a I'm going to skip that word, not even going to butcher it, escrow agreement. The prime contractor establishes an escrow account in a federally insured financial institution and enters into a tripartite, I may not be said right, escrow agreement with the financial institution as escrow agent and all of the suppliers of labor and material. The escrow agreement shall establish the terms of payment under the contract and of resolution of disputes among the parties. The government makes payments to the contractor's escrow account, and the escrow agent distributes the payments in accordance with the agreement or triggers the disputes resolution procedures if required. Certificate of deposit. The contractor deposits certificates of deposit from a federally insured financial institution with the contracting officer in an acceptable form, executable by the contracting officer. A deposit of the types of security listed in 28.204-1 and 28.204-2. 2. The contractor shall submit to the government one of the payment protections selected by the contracting officer. C. The contracting officer, the contractor shall furnish all bonds or alternative payment protection, including any necessary reinsurance agreements before receiving a notice to proceed with the work or being allowed to start work. 28.102-2, amount required. A. Definition as used in the subsection. Original contract price means the award price of the contract, or for requirements contracts, the price payable for the estimated total quantity, or for the indefinite quantity contracts, the price payable for the specified minimum quantity. Original contract price does not include the price of any options except those options exercised at the time of the contract award. B. Contracts exceeding $150,000 per the Miller Act. 1. Performance bonds. Unless the contracting officer determines that a lesser amount is adequate for the protection of the government, the penal amount of performance bonds must equal 100% of the original contract price, and if the contract price increases, an additional amount equal to 100% of the increase. 2. Payment bonds. Unless the contracting officer makes a written determination supported by specific findings that a payment bond in this amount is impractical, the amount of the payment bond must equal A. 100% of the original contract price, and B. The contract price increases, an additional amount equal to 100% of the increase. B2. The amount of the payment bond must be no less than the amount of the performance bond. C. Contracts exceeding $30,000 but not exceeding $150,000 unless the contracting officer determines that a lesser amount is adequate for the protection of the government. The penal amount of the payment bond or the amount of alternative payment protection must equal 100% original contract price, and if the contract price increases, an additional amount equal to 100% of the increase. D, too fast. Securing additional payment protection. If the contract price increases, the government must secure any needed additional protection by directing the contractor to increase the penal sum of the existing bond, obtain an additional bond, or furnish additional alternative payment protection. E, reduce an amount. The contracting officer may reduce the amount of security to support a bond, subject to conditions of 28.203-5C or 28.204B. 28.102-3 Contract clauses. A, insert a clause substantially the same as the clause at 52.228-15 Performance and Payment Bonds. The construction and solicitations and contracts for construction that contain a requirement for performance and payment bonds if the resulting contract is expected to exceed $150,000. The contracting officer may revise paragraphs B1 and or B2 of the clause to establish a lower percentage in accordance with 28.102-2B. If the provision at 52.228-1 is not included in the solicitation, the contracting officer must set a period of time for return of executed bonds. B, insert the clause at 52.228-13 Alternative Payment Protections in solicitations and contracts for construction when the estimated or actual value exceeds $30,000 but does not exceed $150,000. Complete the clause by specifying the payment protection selected. See 28.102-1B1 and the deadline for submission. The contracting officer may revise paragraph B of the clause to establish a lower percentage in accordance with 28.102-2C. 28.103 Performance and Payment Bonds for other than construction contracts. Now we're getting to that spot. 28.103-1 General. A, generally, agencies shall not require performance and payments bonds for other than construction contracts. However, performance and payment bonds may be used as permitted in 28.103-2 and 28.103-3. B, the contractor shall furnish all bonds before receiving a notice to proceed with the work. C, no bond shall be required after the contract has been awarded if it was not specifically required in the contract, except as may be determined necessary for a contract modification. 28.103-2 Performance bonds. A, performance bonds may be required for contracts exceeding the simplified acquisition threshold when necessary to protect the government's interest. That's really good. That stopped me my track. I'm going to keep reading and see what it says before I put in my 2 cents. The following situations may warrant a performance bond. Government property, that would be each citizen, or funds are to be provided to the contractor for use in performing the contract or as partial compensation. So, as in retention of salvage material. So they use us because we are government property as sometimes as partial compensation or, of course, the slave. 2, a contractor sells assets to or merges with another concern, and the government, after recognizing the latter concern as a successor in interest, desires assurance that it is financially capable. Interesting. And somehow I think I went. Yes, I did. That's weird. Sorry. Okay. 3. Substantial progress payments are made before delivery of end items starts. Contracts are for dismantling, demolition, or removal of improvements. The government may require additional performance bond protection when a contract price is increased. That's crazy. The contracting officer must determine the contractor's responsibility, even though a bond has been or can be obtained. 28.103-2 Performance Bonds. A. Performance bonds may be required for contracts exceeding the simplified acquisition threshold when necessary to protect the government's interests. The following situations may warrant, we know what a warrant is, a performance bond. Government property, that's the people, or funds are to be provided to the contractor for use in performing the contract or as partial compensation, as in retention of salvage material, once again. A contractor sells assets to or merges with another concern, and the government, after recognizing the latter concern as a successor in interest, desires assurance that it's financially capable. It is financially capable, excuse me. 3, substantial progress payments are made before delivery and end items starts. 4, contracts are for dismantling, demolition, or removal of improvements. B, the government may require additional performance bond protection when a contract price is increased, and the contracting officer must determine the contractor's responsibility. So, as you can tell, a lot of this stuff is repeated over and over again, but it's okay. 28.103-3 Payment bonds. A payment bond is required only when a performance bond is required. So, a payment bond is required only when a performance bond is required. So, those are two different bonds, which are two different papers, forms. And if the use of a payment bond is in the government's interest. When a contract price is increased, the government may require additional bond protection in an amount adequate to protect suppliers of labor and material. 28.103-4 Contract Clause. The contracting officer shall insert a clause substantially the same as the clause at 52.228-16. Performance and payment bonds other than construction bonds in solicitations and contracts that contain a requirement for both payment and performance bonds. The contracting officer shall determine the amount of each bond for insertion in the clause. The amount shall be adequate to protect the interests of the government. It's always about protecting the government. The contracting officer shall also set a period of time, normally 10 days, for return of executed bonds. Alternate shall be used when only performance bonds are required. 28.104 Annual performance bonds. Annual performance bonds apply to non-construction contracts. So that's another form to add to the packet. They shall provide a gross penal sum applicable to the total amount of all covered contracts. When the penal sums obligated by contracts are approximately equal to or exceed the penal sum of the annual performance bond, an additional bond will be required to cover additional contracts. 28.105 Other types of bonds. The head of the contracting activity may approve using other types of bonds in connection with acquiring particular supplies or services. These types include advance payment bonds and patent infringement bonds. Oh, that's interesting. There's advanced payment bonds, huh? 28.105-1, advanced payment bonds. Let's see what this is all about. Advanced payment bonds may be required only when the contract contains an advanced payment provision and a performance bond is not furnished. The contracting officer shall determine the amount of the advanced payment bond necessary to protect the government. 28.105-2, patent infringement bonds. They just bonding all over the world, huh? A, contracts providing for patent indemnity may require these bonds only if a performance bond is not furnished and the financial responsibility of the contractor is unknown or doubtful, and the contracting officer shall determine the penal sum. 28.106-1. So I'll say 28.106, which is the administration, and then we'll go into 28.106-1, bonds and bond-related forms. Here we go. The following standard form, SF, and optional forms, OFs, shown in 53.301 and 53.302, shall be used except in foreign countries when a bid bond, performance, or payment bond, or an individual surety is required. The bond form shall be used as indicated as the instruction portion of each form. SF24 is your bid bond. You can see 28.101 for that. SF25 is the performance bond. See 28.102-1 and 28.106-3B. SF25A, which is payment bond. See 28.102-1 and 28.106-3B. SF25B, continuation sheet for SFs 24, 25, and 25A. SF28, affidavit of individual surety. See 28.203. SF34, annual bid bond. See 28.001. SF35, annual performance bond. See 28.104. SF273, reinsurance agreement for a Miller Act performance bond. See 28.202A4. SF274, reinsurance agreement for a Miller Act payment bond. See 28.202A4. SF275, reinsurance agreement in favor of the United States. See 28.202A4. SF1414, consent of surety. See 28.106-5. SF1415, consent of surety in increase of penalty. See 28.106-3. SF1416, payment bond for other than construction contracts. See 28.103-3 and 28.106-3B. SF1418, performance bond for other than construction contracts. See 28.103-2 and 28.106-3B. OF90, release of lien on real property. There's another one. See 28.203-5, and here's another. OF91, release of personal property from escrow. See 28.203-5. Okay, so what's next? 28.106-2, substitution of surety bonds. A new surety bond covering all or part of the obligations on a bond previously approved may be substituted for the original bond if approved by the head of contracting activity or as otherwise specified in agency regulation. B, when a new surety bond is approved, the contracting officer shall notify the principal and surety of the original bond of the effective date in new bond. Ooh, pretty interesting. Ooh, I'm getting ideas. Okay. 28.106-3. Additional bond and security. A, when additional bond coverage is required and is secured in whole or in part by the original surety or sureties, agency shall use standard form 1415, consent of surety and increase of penalty. Standard form 1415 is authorized for local reproduction, and a copy of the form is furnished for this purpose in Part 53 of the loose leaf edition of the FAR. B, when additional bond coverage is required and is secured in whole or in part by a new surety or by one of the alternatives described in 28.204 in lieu of corporate or individual surety, agency shall use standard form 25 performance bond, standard form 1418 performance bond for other than construction contracts, standard form 25A payment bond, or standard form 1416 payment bond for other than construction contracts. Moving along. 28.106-4, contract clause. A, the contracting officer shall insert the clause at 52.228-2, additionally in solicitations and contracts when bonds are required. In accordance with Section 806A3 of Public Law 102-190, as amended by Sections 2091 and 8105 Public Law 103-355. The contracting officer shall insert the clause at 52.228-12, prospective subcontractor requests for bonds in solicitations and contracts with respect to which a payment bond will be furnished pursuant to the Miller Act. See 28.102-1, except for contracts for the acquisition of commercial items as defined in subpart 2.1. Let me take a check real quick. All right. 28.106-5, consent of surety. This is what I want to know. When I get booked, how did I give them consent? Probably those damn intake forms. A, when any contract is modified, the contracting officer shall obtain the consent of surety if an additional bond is obtained from other than the original surety. No additional bond is required, and the modification is for new work beyond the scope of the original contract. So this is how they get you when you very first get in trouble, when you get booked into jail. They can just modify each time you get booked so that they really, after the first time, really don't need your, permission, I guess, because you're already surety with that specific jurisdiction or something like that. I'll figure it out, but that's what I'm getting out of this. The modification does not change that contract scope, but changes the contract price upward or downward by more than 25% or $50,000. Or consent of surety is required for a novation agreement. See subpart 42.12. When a contract for which performance or payment is secured by any of the types of security listed in 28.204 is modified as described in paragraph A of this subsection, no consent of surety is required. Bingo. There you go. Agencies shall use standard form 1414 consent of surety for all types of contracts. 28.106-6 furnishing information. A surety on the bond, upon his written request, may be furnished information on the progress of the work, payments, and estimated percentage of completion concerning the contract for which the bond was furnished. So I wonder if I could take a case number and ask for the information on that case number as far as the progress of it, payments, and the percentage of completion, because it is a contract and they recontract every time you get booked or every time they give you a ticket or pull you over or, whatever the case may be. When a payment bond has been provided, the contracting officer shall, upon request, furnish the name and the address of the surety or sureties to any subcontractor or supplier who has furnished or been requested to furnish labor or material for the contract. In addition, general information concerning the work progress, payments, and the estimated percentage of completion may be furnished to persons who have provided labor or materials and have not been paid. So I wonder, okay, maybe I'll get to it. When a payment bond has been provided for a contract, the head of the agency or designee shall furnish a certified copy of the bond and the contract for which it is given to any person who makes a request. So that would be like, say, if you went to court and you got charged with something, or you're on probation and you go to court. So anytime you go to court and they give you that certified copy right there, that has your charges and all the information, that's right there is a contract right there. So 9 times out of 10 they give you a certified copy, which would be the bond in the contract. To any person who makes a request, therefore, and who furnishes an affidavit that the requester has supplied labor or materials for such work and payment therefore has not been made, or the requester being sued on such bond. The person who makes the request shall be required to pay such costs of preparation as determined by the head of the agency or designee to the reasonable and appropriate. See 40 U.S.C. 3133. With that, I believe when they say the prep fees on that, I think I know what they're saying, because I believe they're like $250. Oh no. Crap. Okay. Let's see here. 40 U.S.C. 3133 is a section of U.S. Code, provides payment bonds for contract. Okay. Provides that every person has furnished labor or material in carrying out work provided for in a contract for which a payment bond is furnished under section 3131 of this title, in that has not been paid in full within 90 days after the day on which the person did or performed the last of the labor, or furnish or supply the material for which the claim is made may bring a civil action on the payment bond for the amount of the unpaid at the time of the civil action is brought, and may prosecute the action to final execution and judgment due for the amount due. So you can take all your cases, because each case that you have is a bond, or each charge that you have is a bond. So you could take them and say, hey, send them a request and say, I never got paid for those, this, and this bond when I was incarcerated. Um, yeah, what's going on? I need copies. I need certified copies of everything, or take them to court. That's some cool. You know what? I'm so glad I did this. This is how I learn, you guys. Section 806A2 of Public Law 102-190, as amended by Sections 2091 and 8105 of Public Law 103-355, requires that the federal government provide information to subcontractors on payment bonds under contracts for other than commercial items, as defined in Subpart 2.1, upon the written or oral request of a subcontractor, supplier, or prospective subcontractor supplier under a contract with respect to which a payment bond has been furnished pursuant to the Miller Act. The contracting officer shall promptly provide to the requester, either orally or in writing, as appropriate, of any of the following: name and address of the surety or sureties on the payment bond, penal amount of the payment bond, copy of the payment bond. The contracting officer may impose reasonable fees to cover the cost of copying and providing a copy of the payment bond. Just run me my stuff. Let me see here. It looks like I'm getting into withholding contracting payments. I'll go ahead and do that one, then I will cut it for part 3. 28.106-7, withholding contract payments. During contract performance, agencies shall not withhold payments due to contractors or assignees because subcontractors or suppliers have not been paid. If after completion of the contract work, the government receives written notice from the surety regarding the contractor's failure to meet its obligation to its subcontractors or suppliers, the contracting officer shall withhold final payment. However, the surety must agree to hold the government harmless from any liability resulting from the withholding of the final payment. The contracting officer will authorize the final payment upon agreement between the contractor and the surety, or upon a judicial determination of the rights of the parties. For any withholding incident to the labor standards provisions of the contract, see Part 22. I mean, this is really good. I guess I'll finish this one, and then it starts at 28.200. 28.106-8, payment to subcontractors or suppliers. The contracting officer will only authorize payment to subcontractors or suppliers from an ILC or any other cash equivalent security upon a judicial determination of the rights of the parties. A signed, notarized statement by the contractor that the payment is due and owed, or a signed agreement between the parties as to the amount due and owed. So I will cut it off there at part 2, and part 3 will hopefully be up later on. See you guys at the next one.